Raytheon, Rafaf. Korik ruled Liverpool's underworld from the shadows. Khyber Zun grew his empire under a burning Afghan sun, and Selra Vaughn stole fortunes without ever firing a shot. Three names bound by a single, dangerous thread, the Heroin Highway, a pipeline so flawless it seemed untouchable, until betrayal cracked it open and unleashed a war that no one could control. Raytheon, Raf. Korik had learned long ago that in Liverpool's Stanley Dock, time moved differently in the early morning hours. The city was still asleep, the streets silent except for the distant hum of ship engines, and the occasional cry of a gull circling above the water. The dock lights glowed pale orange against the mist, casting long shadows across the steel containers that stood in neat but endless rows. Rafe walked between them with the confidence of someone who knew every bolt and dent on the metal walls. He was not there to watch the legitimate cargo come and go. His business lived in the spaces no one was supposed to see. The shipment had arrived just before dawn, a container stacked near the edge of the wharf, marked in faded paint with a Turkish shipping company's logo. On paper, it held ceramic tiles destined for a building supply store in Manchester. In reality, the tiles were nothing more than camouflage for the real cargo hidden behind a false wall inside the container. Wrapped in black plastic and sealed in airtight bags were 20 bricks of pure heroin, each one heavy with the promise of millions in street value. Rafe's operation thrived on precision. The dockworkers involved knew exactly which containers to move, which to leave untouched, and which to accidentally delay in customs. A single mistake could cost lives. The bribes were distributed quietly, sometimes in cash, other times as favors that could be called in later. Even the most honest workers learned to keep their eyes down and mouths shut when Rafe's containers arrived. He never touched the product himself. That was his rule. Distance was protection, and he lived by it. On the far side of the dock, a small crew worked under dim floodlights, pretending to handle regular cargo. Two men in orange vests unlocked the container and began unloading tiles onto a forklift. No one looking from a distance would suspect that the real work was happening just out of sight. Inside a secure warehouse that Rafe controlled, the false wall came out in under 10 minutes, revealing the neatly packed heroin bricks. Each bag was quickly weighed, checked, and repackaged into plain cardboard boxes labeled as kitchenware. By the time the sun began to rise, the drugs were already on their way to various stash houses across the city. Rafe kept his distance physically, but never mentally. He oversaw everything, often from the darkened window of a nearby building, watching for any sign of interference. The dock was a dangerous place for a man in his position. Rival crews had tried before to intercept shipments, and while most failed, the attempts were enough to make Rafe paranoid. He paid for extra eyes on the ground. Lookouts posted at the edges of the pier, ready to signal if an unfamiliar face appeared. The success of his pipeline depended on one thing: invisibility. He had learned early that greed was the enemy of subtlety. His shipments were large enough to profit, but small enough to avoid attracting major attention from the national crime units. Every detail mattered, from the timing of the deliveries to the placement of the containers. Rafe's name never appeared in any paperwork, his face never on any security feed. He was the ghost in the system, the man who could move millions of pounds worth of heroin through one of the busiest ports in Britain without leaving a single fingerprint behind. As the last of the boxes left the dock on an unmarked van, Rafe lit a cigarette and leaned against the cold steel of a container, watching the vehicle disappear into the fog. The city was waking up now. Commuters heading to work, shops opening their doors, buses filling with passengers. None of them had any idea that, just a few streets away, the first wave of a shipment that would flood Liverpool's underworld had already slipped past them unnoticed. For Rafe, it was just another morning on the wharf, another step in a chain that stretched halfway across the world. But deep down, he knew that chains could break. And when they did, they never broke cleanly. Thousands of miles away from the damp air of Liverpool, the journey of Rafe Korik's heroin began under a sun that seemed to scorch everything it touched. In the far reaches of an Afghan valley, Where the mountains rose like jagged walls against the horizon, the fields were not filled with wheat or corn, but with endless stretches of blooming poppies. The petals, soft and delicate in the breeze, hid the grim truth of their purpose. This land belonged to Kaivar Zund, a man whose face was as much a rumor as it was reality. Few could say they had met him, and those who had rarely spoke of it. Kaivar ruled without speeches or public appearances. His orders traveled through his soldiers, a mix of hardened fighters and young boys who had grown up knowing nothing but the business of opium. Every harvest began before dawn. Workers moved through the fields, slicing the green pods so the milky sap could bleed out and dry in the heat. That sap, collected with quiet precision, would eventually become the heroin that fueled lives and destroyed them on the other side of the world. Kaivar didn't deal in half measures. His product was pure, and his routes were tightly controlled. No one stole from him without consequence, and no one disrupted his shipments without vanishing from the earth soon after. From the valley, the opium began its transformation in hidden processing labs deep in the hills. The air there was heavy with chemical fumes, and the work was done under lantern light to avoid drawing attention from overhead surveillance. Once refined, the heroin was packed into blocks wrapped in layers of waxed paper and black plastic. Then began the long, dangerous journey out of Afghanistan. The first leg took it across the border into Iran, hidden inside modified fuel tankers. The drivers were paid well, but they were also expendable. If they were stopped by patrols or ambushed by rivals, they were on their own. From there, the cargo moved through the rugged mountains of eastern Turkey, where the next key player waited. Darya Samlik had built a reputation as the kind of smuggler who could make anything disappear into legitimate trade. Her skill lay in her disguises, of goods, of roots, and of herself. Darya operated from a small warehouse near the Black Sea, a place that looked abandoned from the outside, but inside was a hive of controlled chaos. Teams worked on breaking down the shipments, measuring the bricks, and concealing them in ways that customs officials rarely detected. Sometimes it was false walls in shipping containers, other times hollowed out stacks of building materials or furniture. For Rafe's latest order, she had chosen ceramic tiles thick enough to hide the product without altering the container's weight in a way that would raise suspicion. She knew the risks. The heroin pipeline was a living thing, and every link in it had to hold under pressure. One broken connection and the flow would stop, leaving everyone involved exposed. Darya trusted no one completely, not even the men who worked for her. She changed routes without warning, swapped drivers at the last minute, and used decoy containers that carried nothing but worthless goods. The more unpredictable her movements, the harder it was for anyone to follow. Once the drugs were secured in the container, Darya's part of the job became about timing. She knew exactly which ships to use, which ports had officials willing to look the other way, and how to manipulate schedules so that the container's arrival would align perfectly with Rafe's crew at the Liverpool docks. The shipment left Turkey under a clear night sky, the waves calm as the freighter cut through the water toward Europe. By the time the sun rose over the Black Sea, the heroin was already a ghost in the global shipping system, moving under the guise of legitimate trade. For Kaivar, Darya, and Rafe, the chain was working perfectly. None of them knew that perfection never lasted. Somewhere along that route, eyes were already watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Heroin Highway was moving, but it would not remain untouched forever. When the container finally arrived in Liverpool, it no longer belonged to Darya Samlik's crew or to Kaivar Zund. The moment it touched British soil, control shifted to Lucian Bragg, a man whose reputation had been built on fear. Lucian wasn't a talker. He didn't charm people into compliance. He didn't negotiate when things went wrong. He enforced order with methods that left messages no one could misunderstand. His name alone was enough to keep most rivals from even thinking about approaching a shipment that was under his watch. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a stare that seemed to strip the nerve from anyone who met it, Lucian had been Rafe Carrick's shield for years. His loyalty wasn't born out of friendship or respect. It was transactional. Rafe paid him more than anyone else ever could, and in return, Lucien made sure nothing interfered with the flow of heroin from the docks to the city's streets. He had a network of lookouts posted at key points across Liverpool, men who could spot trouble from blocks away and send a warning before a single police car turned the corner. The product's path from the dock to the end dealers was a well-oiled machine. Stash houses scattered across the city received the boxes disguised as legitimate goods. From there, the heroin was broken down into smaller packages and moved through street-level distributors. Lucien oversaw the transfers like a conductor with an orchestra. Timing, precision, and control were everything. Mistakes weren't tolerated, and anyone who risked drawing attention paid a steep price. But even in a business built on secrecy, cracks could form. Rumors began to swirl about Milo Fenswick, one of Rafe's trusted lieutenants. Milo had been with the operation for 3 years, working closely with Lucien to coordinate shipments. He was known for his sharp memory and his ability to remember every date, time, and address without writing anything down. But lately, his behavior had shifted. He disappeared for hours without explanation, missed meetings, and seemed distracted during critical handovers. Lucien noticed before Rafe did. In his world, changes like that were rarely harmless. People didn't just lose focus. They either got scared or greedy, and both could destroy everything. Then came the whisper that Milo had been spotted meeting with strangers at a bar near the northern edge of the city. They weren't from Liverpool. They weren't from anywhere familiar. That alone was enough to set off alarms in Lucien's head. Rafe dismissed the first warnings, insisting that Milo was too smart to betray them. But Lucien had seen it before. Loyalty was cheap when compared to the kind of money rival crews could offer. And in the heroin trade, betrayal wasn't just dangerous, it was contagious. If one man could be turned, others could follow. Tension in the crew began to grow. Lucien tightened security, doubling the number of lookouts on every run and insisting on shorter storage times between the docks and the stash houses. Milo kept his position, but Lucien started following his movements without telling Rafe. He needed proof before he made his move. One night, a minor disruption occurred. A van carrying a portion of the latest shipment was followed for several miles by an unfamiliar car. Lucien's men lost it in traffic, but the incident was enough to make him believe someone was watching them closely. The pattern matched what happened when a rival gang was preparing to intercept. It wasn't yet an attack, it was reconnaissance. In Lucien's mind, that meant the clock was ticking. If Milo was the leak, they didn't have much time before the entire operation was compromised. And if Milo wasn't the leak, then something even worse was happening. Someone outside their circle had found a way to get dangerously close to the heart of the Heroin Highway. Either way, Lucien was prepared to do what he always did. Cut the thread out before it could spread. The shipment that was supposed to cement Rafe Currick's dominance over the Liverpool trade arrived on schedule. On paper, it was flawless. Its seals intact, its documentation in order, its arrival time aligned perfectly with the offloading crew. The container was hauled from the ship to the dockyard without delay, and the paperwork passed through customs without so much as a raised eyebrow. Everything suggested that the pipeline was running as smoothly as ever. But when the container doors were opened inside Rafe's secure warehouse, the reality struck like a blade to the chest. The ceramic tiles were there, stacked neatly in rows, just as they had been loaded in Turkey. But behind the false wall, where 20 bricks of pure heroin should have been, there was nothing. Not a gram. The space was empty, clean, and untouched, as if the drugs had never been there at all. The smell of fresh plaster and cardboard filled the air, replacing the usual faint chemical scent that clung to the shipments. It wasn't a theft carried out in a hurry. This had been done with surgical precision. Lucien Bragg's face hardened as he stood over the open container, his fists clenched tight. He ordered everyone out except for a small circle of trusted men. They went over the container inch by inch. There were no broken locks, no tool marks, No evidence of tampering during the short journey from the dock to the warehouse. This wasn't a dockside robbery. The theft had happened before the container even reached Liverpool. Milo Fenswick's name was on everyone's mind, though no one spoke it aloud in front of Lucien. He had gone missing the night before, his phone switched off, his flat abandoned. His car was found hours later, parked along the River Mersey with the keys still in the ignition and the driver's door unlocked. There was no sign of a struggle, no hint of where he had gone. To Lucien, it didn't look like an abduction. It looked like a man who had decided not to come back. The truth was far worse than Rafe or Lucien had imagined. Weeks earlier, Milo had been approached by Selra Vaughan, a trafficker whose network extended deep into mainland Europe. Selra didn't rely on violence to control her routes. She used influence, money, and the right officials in the right places. Her specialty was container manipulation, the art of diverting high-value cargo without the original sender or receiver knowing until it was too late. She had operatives inside Rotterdam's sprawling port, a key transit point for many shipments entering Britain. When Milo passed her the details of Rafe's latest shipment, Selra's people intercepted the container before it ever left Dutch waters. Using duplicate seals and forged documentation, they swapped the heroin for empty tiles, reassembled the false wall, and loaded the container back onto the same shipping schedule. By the time it reached Liverpool, the drugs were already in Selra's warehouses on the continent, ready to be redirected through her own network. For Rafe, the missing shipment was more than a loss of money. It was a direct message that his pipeline could be breached. For Kavar Zund, it was an insult. Someone had dared to cut into his product's route. And for Lucien, it was personal. The loss meant his reputation as an enforcer had been tarnished. In the Underworld, word traveled fast, and rivals would see this as an opportunity to test the edges of Rafe's control. That night, the docks felt different. The air was colder, the shadows sharper. Lucien stood alone near the water, his mind already turning over the steps needed to find Milo, recover what was left of the shipment, and erase anyone connected to the betrayal. But deep down, he knew the damage had already been done. The Heroin Highway had been breached, and once a route was exposed, it was never truly secure again. Somewhere across the channel, Selra Vaughan was already carving her own path into Liverpool, and there was nothing Rafe could do to stop her from coming. Rafe Korik had always believed that control was a matter of planning. Every shipment, every bribe, every meeting was calculated down to the last minute, but no amount of precision could prepare him for what came after the empty container. In the days that followed, the network he had built began to fray at every edge. Kavar Zund, furious at losing a shipment worth millions, sent a single message through intermediaries: the Liverpool line was cut. There would be no more product until the theft was avenged. For a man like Kavar, that wasn't just punishment. It was a death sentence for Rafe's business. Without the steady flow of heroin, the street dealers who relied on his supply scrambled to find new sources. Some turned to smaller gangs, others to rival suppliers who had been waiting for a chance to move in. Prices rose overnight, violence spiked, and the careful balance Rafe had maintained collapsed into chaos. His own men, once loyal because of steady pay, began to question whether staying was worth the risk. Desperation in the drug trade bred instability, and instability was fatal. Lucien Bragg refused to show panic, but even he could see the walls closing in. With no product to move, his role as the enforcer was becoming irrelevant. His influence came from the fear that disrupting Rafe's operation meant certain death. Now, with the operation crippled, fear was no longer enough. Rivals began circling, old grudges resurfaced, and whispers of retribution filled the pubs and backrooms of Liverpool's underworld. Milo Fenswick's betrayal remained a ghost hanging over every conversation. No one had seen him since his disappearance, but his absence was proof enough. Lucien made it his personal mission to find him, though whether it was to recover the stolen shipment or to make an example out of him no longer mattered. For Lucien, the principle was everything. No one walked away from a betrayal without paying. Yet, despite his network of informants, Milo remained out of reach. If he was with Selra Vaughn, then he was already beyond Liverpool's grasp. Selra's move had done more than steal a shipment. It had shifted the balance of power. She didn't need to come to Liverpool with soldiers or guns. The theft alone had opened the city to her influence. Small-time suppliers, eager for product and unbothered by loyalty to Rafe, began making quiet arrangements to source through her network. She had taken a single shipment and turned it into a foothold. The final blow came on a night heavy with rain when a convoy of police vehicles rolled into Stanley Dock. The raid was swift and calculated, hitting multiple warehouses at once. An anonymous tip had led them straight to documents, shipping logs, and coded ledgers that, while incomplete, were enough to tie Rafe to past containers that had slipped through unnoticed. He was arrested without resistance, his hands cuffed as he stood under the dockside floodlights, the rain soaking through his coat. He didn't speak, didn't protest. The game was over. Lucien was not arrested that night, but his safety vanished with Rafe's arrest. Without the protection of the operation, he became a target. The same rivals he had once kept in check now saw him as a loose end, a man without a crew. In the weeks that followed, his presence in the city faded. Some said he fled to Ireland, others claimed he had been buried in one of the marshes outside town. No one knew for sure, and in Liverpool's underworld, not knowing was often worse than knowing the truth. The Heroin Highway that had once stretched from the Afghan poppy fields to the warehouses of Liverpool was gone. But routes like that never truly died. They shifted, adapted, found new hands to guide them. Selra Vaughn now held one end of the chain, and somewhere on a different dock in a different city, another shipment was already being loaded. Liverpool's silence was temporary. The next storm was already forming far beyond its shores.